To ask you, are there any other solar ponds outside of UT El Paso? How close are you to commercialization? And can you explain again exactly how you're producing electricity? Is it through steam and turbines?
Good questions. Turned on here. Thanks for the question. Second one first. We use an off-the-shelf organic Rankine cycle heat engine. Several manufacturers make them. Pratt Whitney's one, Infinity Turbines another. What it does is just uses the heat engine to evaporate a refrigerant that turns a turbine, turns a generator, and then we recondense that refrigerant in the process. So it's a fairly well understood off the shelf. What sort of advantaged us recently is a country put a lot of chase into going after low temperature geothermal, which folks in this room are probably well aware of. And that's not exactly borne a lot of fruit, but we get to be the recipients of this low temperature heat engine technology, which we can put to good use. The first question, we are just at the early stages of commercialization. We're in that little valley of death where our team has, pushed it out of the basement, the parents' basement of academia into, say, go get a job. So that's where we are right now. We're putting it out there. We have 4 areas in the States where we're looking at and a few others outside the country. In every all the 4 regions, including the Salton Sea, we the people, via Department of Interior, Corps of Engineers, National Renewable Energy Lab, and others, have done excessive studies to try to understand if solar ponds would work. And they've concluded everyone did work wonderfully. And so we're just getting launched on our commercialization. We'll probably put our first shovel in the ground, my guess is in North Texas sometime this summer. So by the time we roll out here, there will be other solar pond systems we can go kick the tires on, hopefully. Yeah, I think it's probably about answered your question, hopefully.
Okay, right here in the front.
If my topic should be pushed off to the later morning session, I would understand that, but my question is, what's happening with professional lobbyists at this time, and is there a possibility that those lobbying efforts could be overlapped and used where that some of the shareholders could assist us with that as they're doing lobbying of other purposes? Sorry for the long question.
I can speak to some extent to IID's efforts, and we were just in DC with a large group, including the county. Riverside County and their Economic Development Corporation has really stepped forward. I saw Phil Rosentrader here earlier. He deserves a lot of credit for the lobbying effort they've been engaged. So is the county. I think it's going to take that continued level of pressure, and in my mind, our next trip is to Sacramento to remind the folks there how important this is to us. But any help we can get in that lobbying effort, the lobbyists go so far, but what they tell me is faces either in DC or faces in Sacramento make a difference.
Let me add on to that. After some meetings in February February and late January, it was decided that the grouping would go back to Washington with the same idea and get the message back to those parties in Washington. But the timing for those visits, even though it needed to happen, the timing for those visits was the cattle call for ACWA and for National Association of Counties. So everybody's making those rounds. And so you're bringing it up. We need to be in Sacramento and following the lead from our assemblymen and other members. And we need to go back to Washington too to continually bring this forward. And as new developments come out, we've got some things that are going to come forward where possibly there will be a pathway to restoration that's agreed upon between 2 major parties. And if we can get the other entities to agree to that and to buy into the idea and move forward, we can go around and shop that everywhere. And I do believe that the lobbying effort, it's not organized at this moment, but it was for that Washington trip, and I believe it needs to carry forward. And we are talking about those things, and we'll be including the Salton Sea Action Committee and our partner agencies, everyone that was willing to see this thing follow through.
Okay, I'd like to thank the panel for this great
I guess
discussion.
not.
And just one final thought. You know, Mr. Kelly mentioned this at the beginning of his presentation. You know, 6 years ago when we were on this stage talking about what's going to be happening in the renewable energy industry, a lot of people said it would never happen. And 2 years ago, they said that there would be no solar built in the Imperial County. And now we're leading the globe in solar development. I've seen more activity with the Salton Sea, and there's a lot of things that have been put into place, such as the approval of the Tawartine Point, Bruce Wilcock and his group, and from my standpoint, looking at economic development and how the geothermal industry and these other opportunities are going to bring the tax dollars that are going to be needed to bring restoration of the Salton Sea. So I hope to be here in 2 years talking about these projects coming to fruition, but we do know that the geothermal industry will continue out in the Salton Sea area, and that's going to be a major driver on those taxes for this region. So I want to thank you again and ask Mark to come up and start the next panel.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have the sponsors up there. Can we get the next panel starting to get ready to come up here because we're running a little behind? And we'll make sure we get to lunch on time. So we also need to make sure that those of you that have gone to the exhibit hall, please turn in your passports at the registration desk in the front. For this second panel, we're going to have some cards at the center tables to make sure that you can ask questions. Just raise your hand and somebody from IVDC will pick those up from you. Also, there are surveys will be put on your table, but also we will be sending them out electronically, so please respond with your comments about how you liked or disliked or improvements that can be made to this summit. Okay? So we're going to go on to our second panel, which is Industry-Specific Session 1.1, Salton Sea Specific Area Implementation Strategies. And our moderator for this one is Mr. Bob Yellen. Mr. Yellen has been with Chambers Group for over 10 years and serves as the Vice President of Business Development for Federal Programs and New Initiatives. He is responsible for the development and implementation of business development strategies, new technical initiatives for major clients and government agencies, and the expansion of company services to the renewable energy and climate change markets. Having gained over 35 years of experience in the environmental engineering business, and having held the positions of president and board member of AeroVironment, did I pronounce that correctly? Environmental Services and Remediation Services, subsidiaries of AeroVironment Incorporated. Mr. Yellen has a PhD in chemistry from State University of New York at Buffalo and is a published author of over a dozen patents related to kinetics and mechanisms of reactions and methods to achieve fuel and emission reduction from fossil fuel combustion. Wow. Mr. Yellen, please come up and have your panel come up.
Okay. If the panel can come up. Supervisor Ryan said that Tim Kelly gave him permission to tell a joke. I was not given permission to tell a joke, but I was given permission to be myself. That's probably the biggest joke. And I'm going to introduce each panel member just before they speak, but I'm going to take the chance to be myself for a couple of minutes and philosophize. And it's easy to philosophize about renewable energy and everything because I come from the one place where there also was a mecca. We had a tree in Brooklyn, and we were able to get that tree to grow. When I listen to the talks today, one of the things that come to mind, and I mentioned this last night over at Hot Rosin Beer to someone who I don't think is here right now, that when my youngest daughter was 16 years old, I was a member of the Optimist Club, like your Rotary and so on, and she was applying for a scholarship for college. They were going to give her some money, and she had a talk on a topic. And listening to everyone for these last several days and hearing the people on the last panel, her topic is very fitting. Her topic was destiny, choice, not chance. And if one thinks of what Tim just said about just 2 years ago and 6 years ago, one can see that we have made many right choices. And I know there have been movies like that, getting on a subway. You get on one door and it closes, you get on another train, it closes. It's purely chance. So how do you make choice? To make choice, you have to know facts and you have to not give up. And don't ever listen to the person who tells you they see the light at the end of the tunnel. Because I'll tell you what I know from coming from Brooklyn. You go to a tunnel, and as you go further and further, you just see another wall in front of yourself. So you got to look behind and see the light at the other end of the tunnel of how far you've come. And then based upon that, you say, why is it that we're making such progress? And again, it's destiny is choice, not chance. And our panel today is going to discuss some of that. In order to make the right choices, to make it more than 50% going through the right door, you need to know the facts and where you come from and where you're going. Our first speaker today is Brian Mooney. He is a director at Chambers Group of Planning. And as director of planning, he has spent over 35 years of professional services specializing in major planning programs, etc. And I really want to get into the session, so I'm not going to talk too much about people's history, but I will say he's very relevant today because he did the original master plan for the Salton Sea, taking inputs from companies such as Tetra Tech and so on from their studies. And that master plan, if we stick on that, we get on the wrong door. And it ends up we're left to chance again. So knowing where we came from, we're going to hear today a little from Brian on what has to be done so you can move forward, because the old master plan has to obviously be modified. Brian?
Thank you very much, Bob. Let me see if I can figure this out. The arrows are going to move forward. Very briefly, point it this way? Point it this way, I see. You know, this is one thing that technology is not my specialty. But let me just actually, we're just pointing it to the next slide. I'm sorry? Point it here. Ah, yes. Thank you very much for the introduction, Bob. Actually, I go back a long way in planning in Imperial County, as a matter of fact, and I'm going to talk today about some work I did in 2005 and 2006. But actually, my work goes back to the 80s in doing one of the first comprehensive general plan updates for the County of Imperial. And in the county, you've always been very innovative and creative, and that's an important thing. In 2005, we were retained to work with the Salton Sea Authority, the Joint Powers Group, to actually look at the improvement programs that were going on by Tetra Tech, the studies that actually going forward. We called this a master development plan, but in reality, it's a framework plan. And the framework plan that we're going to talk about a little bit today fits so much into what the earlier panels were discussing in relationship to where they were going to go. And yeah, the general area, of course, you all know it very well, and spanning all of those various jurisdictions, and each one from the standpoint of the local governments and also the tribal government, the IID, all very, very important. This really was the overall concept from the standpoint, but it looked at the sea as being a smaller area, and then ultimately one of the key aspects was going to be how can we use the surrounding land? And I've got to go through a little bit of the statistics, but ultimately I can talk in great areas. One of the key things we did, though, and it fits into some of the discussions earlier, was we ended up breaking the surrounding lands into 6 planning districts. And the 6 planning districts would allow us to move forward and look at issues and options that fit the stakeholders of each one of those districts. By the way, this overall plan looked at transportation, looked at renewable energy, looked at residential. It actually included up to 200,000 units. And so when you look at Travertine, you see that fitting in. One of the key things about having a plan, though, is ultimately it fits into the regulatory process. It ultimately gives us a way to start working at the local government level and to allow those projects to move forward and to be achieved. In this particular case, the planning area covered 245,000 acres. That's the 380 square miles of water service. It included the various communities of North Shore and Oasis, Mecca, the Torres Martinez tribal trust lands. And the trust lands, by the way, become an important element in relationship to, because there's a lot of opportunities when you're dealing with trust properties. As we've seen with the Cahuilla in Palm Springs, the Torres Martinez Cahuilla can offer an exceptional opportunity to the other stakeholders. Of course, it includes the Salton City, Salton Sea Beach, Desert Shores, Bombay Beach. The irrigation district, obviously, Imperial Irrigation District becomes an important player in Coachella Valley Water District and the Salton Sea Community Service Area. A little bit of the photos. I ultimately ended up doing a series of community outreach programs. We met throughout the area. And of course, one of the things I find very, very important is that you have to understand the history to ultimately plan the future. And so ultimately getting a feel for the community, for the individuals, the stakeholders, the places that ultimately are going to be the future. And my focus is really on looking at the land. It's how do we achieve it? Once we establish a shoreline and the programs that we're going to go, as we've seen with that, ultimately this particular plan looked at an allocation of land use which went over from 25% development, urban development, 25% agriculture, and then 50% open space. Again, creating a framework in relation to work. In this particular case, the land uses included a seaside village, residential, tribal residential, entertainment, casino operations, obviously commercial employment, geothermal at the time. The constraints, and actually one of the key constraints is also going to be one of the ultimate opportunities, and that's the multiple jurisdictional agencies. Finding a lead agency that's going to take the overall lead in this is extremely important. Multiple land ownerships, the infrastructure limitations, obviously the air quality and the expanding playas and dust, conflicting goals for the various regions in relationship to it. Water rights, funding, of course, contamination, and public perception. However, the opportunities are great. The opportunities in relationship to solar and wind, recreation, tourism, natural habitat, conservation, geothermal resources, affordable housing, a wide range of economic opportunities, economic development opportunities, and of course, as I said, also the trust lands with the entertainment facilities. One of the things on the side I also teach, and one of the new areas that we're focusing on is creating plans that have a focus on innovation. And to be in this 245,000 acres, when I'm looking at renewable energy, I'm looking at this is one of the great opportunities. And we look for, the community economic developers, as we talked earlier. We look for innovation intermediaries, very similar to the last speaker who was talking about the salt ponds. We look to tie and connect with universities and colleges, and that's an important element in relationship to that. And then finally, business and industries. Plans ultimately are successful when they're public-private partnerships. And ultimately, this is one I think that there's really a lot of opportunity. In relationship to the innovative land use development, what I would propose, ultimately, you have the framework plan there, is to go back in your leadership in relationship to looking at where those districts can be basically rethought in relationship to renewable energy, sustainable communities, and thinking in terms of the 50 to 100-year programs in relationship to that. Conservation districts, agriculture, entertainment, and really tying it all together. The Salton Sea was a wonderful idea many years ago, and I met a number of individuals that have been out there for the entire period, and ultimately bringing them back to a very sustainable community long-term can be done. But it is going to be important that you ultimately put together a program, a plan that ultimately you then can talk to the various agencies, and that you also can keep a regulatory process. We're involved in a lot of litigation right now on projects. So pulling that all together, and I think that's the key from the standpoint of a successful program. We as a community, we as planners have amnesia. We forget that we do these things, but in reality, the Salton Sea Authority actually back in 2005 adopted in 2006 that framework program. And that framework program can be brought back to work with the stakeholders to look at the more innovative development that I think is the opportunity for today. I think also it can use as a framework to work with the various lead agencies like the County of Imperial, the County of Riverside, to set a framework for projects to move forward on a regular basis, and an easier basis. Thank you very much.
Well, we'll go through questions and answers a little later, because I have a question for Brian, and well, we'll get to it. Before we, talking about, again, staying on that road and making the right decisions, and we also talked about, have to know where you've been so you can plan for the future, land use changes and so on, to accommodate renewables. Another thought, when I talk about choice, not chance, there is another component. It's luck. You obviously need luck, because you're never going to make it 100% without going through some wrong doors. And the luck we have here, as they say, and I might joke about it, growing up in Brooklyn, but you have an oasis here of sun that you can become the Mideast of renewable energy. That's luck where you are. Luck happens to be the fact that this community is one of the few places where you can find the agency, the applicant, the consultant, the regulator, being able to get together at a hot rods or whatever, having a sit-down beer and saying we have all one direction, how do we make it work? And naturally making sure that you follow the legal. And then when you also realize luck is, I was at a meeting with some of the people, some supervisors one time at a dinner. I remember saying, are you Republican? Are you Democrat? You Liberal? You Tea Party? They said, what's the difference? In Imperial, we're marching to one drummer. Our individual things go to the good of the whole. So therefore, again, it's very important where things don't change. Again, there's a certain amount of chance. We go from biological problems, biology problems. That was one whole that. We're doing renewable development. We go to cultural, agricultural, then the unions. And now even lawsuits are different. They wait until you get your permit and you're done, and 2 days later the lawsuit comes. So that's the thing that can destroy everything if you leave it to chance. If you have choice, you can navigate. And what's nice, again, in Imperial, the people are there to help you navigate, because we have one vision. And with that, I want to introduce Ernie Rittenberg. He's a shareholder in Gresham Savage Attorneys at Law. And he's going to talk a little bit about knowing the regulations, where they're going, what has to be done. Because again, if you don't comply, everything can be left to chance, and then you're in trouble. But with that, knowing what's coming and where we're going, we can move forward. So Ernie?
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that lead-in very much. And Brian, thank you for your comments. I think we dovetailed beautifully here. Brian was talking about the organization and having a plan and how critically important that is. And what I want to address is taking that the next step. That is, when you have a great plan, moving it forward and getting it approved, because it can be a real challenge. As Bob mentioned, we're a 58 attorney law firm. based in San Bernardino, although we've got offices in 3 other locations as well. We do a tremendous amount of land use entitlement work, including the CEQA and NEPA litigation that often comes up as a result of that. But our goal often for most of the time for clients is to try and minimize the likelihood of litigation coming up. Sometimes it isn't possible to do that, but what you try and do from the outset is be extremely well organized and make sure that you have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's so that the likelihood of a successful challenge to your hard-worked project is minimized. Let's start with the next slide, and whoops, I guess I can do that, can I? I may need it. I'm technically challenged, too. Sorry about this. I must be pushing the wrong button. Are you able to skip that for me? Thank you. There we go. Just as a quick overview, and this is, as it says there, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is a partial list, at least, of the agencies and entities that have interests and or jurisdiction in the Salton Sea area if we are to look at renewable energy and other types of projects. Of course, the Salton Sea Authority, they're at the top of the list, both the counties, potentially the Army Corps, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Torres-Martinez Tribe, and I apologize for the spelling error there. It doesn't matter how many times you proofread these things, you always find something that slipped through. But obviously a number of agencies and entities that both hold stake and potentially have jurisdiction. Next slide, please. What comes of that plethora of entities is, depending on the type of project, what is likely to be your lead agency. And the first thing you have to do with your project, besides have a really clear concept of what it is you're trying to do and identify in advance the potential problems. You have to be inside the head of your opponents on these projects, know in advance what they're going to do, and address those in advance before they have an opportunity to bring them up. But the next part is, who is the lead agency that is going to be involved here? And it really breaks into 2 different parts as we look at the Salton Sea. You have the sea restoration issues, and there it's fairly clear that the likely lead agency, depending on exactly what is being proposed for sea restoration, is probably going to be the Salton Sea Authority or the Army Corps. Potentially, there are a few others as well, but those are probably the 2 that stand out. When it comes to land development, it really depends on the lands that are involved. Clearly, if it's private lands, you're most likely going to be working with either or both of the counties, depending on the location of the site. If it's tribal lands, obviously with the tribe and the BIA, and government lands, it's going to be the BLM or the State Lands Commission. Next slide. Taking those bits and pieces to start with, then you've got to evaluate your entitlement risk. Some projects are simply going to develop more public response, more public interest, more public acrimony, whatever the word is or the particular situation that will happen with your project. You have to expect that they're going to generate attention and press and objections, and you got to plan in advance for that, particularly here with the Salton Sea, particularly because we're talking a complex network of potential solutions here that all have to work hand in hand. It's going to be very complicated. And in particular, as we note here with the Salton Sea, it's going to develop the attention of some really hyper-vigilant, environmentally concerned groups. You have to expect that right from the outset and be prepared to address those issues because they are going to be unique and potentially very challenging here, particularly with renewables. Next slide, please. So you begin planning early, fully outline your project, what it is you're doing, what are its good points, what are its bad points, how do we best address the bad points, be prepared to include all of that right at the outset. You can plan on having really sophisticated legal opponents. All the organizations who become involved on a regular basis in challenging development projects have experienced legal teams, very experienced legal teams. They're very often very well funded, typically from private sources who are very interested. And you can pretty well assume that you're going to have a fight on your hands. And if you assume the worst possible fight, then if anything less than that happens, you will be over-prepared and have a much better chance of getting your project approved. Obviously, in projects like this, when we're talking about the Salton Sea, again, very unique set of circumstances, you can assume that the attention is going to focus on CEQA and NEPA issues. Next. Actually, let's stay on that slide for just a moment. A couple of points, just practical points that I want to mention that we have found in our work on behalf of some clients that have had some very challenging projects. We represent Walmart and Sam's Club. We've done very high-level projects for BNSF Railway and a number of others that are multi-year approval processes, multi-year construction and development, and extremely high scrutiny on these projects. It's essential in those to be absolutely crystal clear through your attorneys and your other consultants what the notice requirements are and follow them to the letter everywhere. It's often best, too, on the environmental side of things, to assume that you're going to have to do an EIR or an EIS from the outset. A lot of people go into a project, even a very large, controversial project, and assume that they ought to try and get a negative declaration. And in our experience, we have found that that's often a huge mistake. You can address and blunt the potential criticisms that come up by assuming from the outset that you're going to invest in doing a detailed environmental document and you're going to go through the full process. You're not going to try and get around it. You're going to go hit it head on. And more often than not, what often comes of that is not only have you truly thought out the problems of your project and how they can be addressed, you've blunted the potential challenge of your opponents. It gives a lot less as you move forward for them to challenge the project on, and it often creates a situation where a lot of times your opponents will actually be appreciative of what you're doing. They may feel that they've got to give a little lip service to making an objection, but we have been surprised how often we actually end up getting the support, even if it's a little low-key, but the support of people who had originally come out to be our opponents because they were impressed that the entity proposing the project was willing to take the time and to spend the money to address the project thoroughly and, quote, get it right. I think particularly when you've got renewable energy opportunities here, they're kind of a blessing and a curse, and we have to keep that in mind as we're looking at these as opportunities to resolve our Salton Sea issue. They present an opportunity, certainly, in that people are very excited about this. It's a whole new field. It's just exploding in front of us. Every one of us has a small, and some of you very large part in that exploding new field right now. And it's very exciting. And as Brian pointed out, it's a time of high innovation, creates excitement, It's an opportunity to be involved, and that can get people in favor of your project in moving forward. But at the same time, there are some groups, sometimes groups that surprise you a little bit, that end up being opposed to these renewable energy projects. Everybody says, oh, well, look, you know, it's renewable energy, it's green, isn't that wonderful? And sometimes the very organizations who have been pressing for green solutions to things are the first ones who are challenging you because of some other issues that exist for a particular type of use. Probably the most obvious one that people have encountered before. I live in the Coachella Valley, and where the windmills are, there is still a huge discussion. It's been somewhat mooted in the last couple of years, but still a huge discussion over birds flying into the propellers and that sort of thing. And that has been largely addressed and resolved, but it is still an issue. And every form of renewable energy has something or some set of these challenges that have to be addressed. So it's just something you have to plan out in advance and create answers for. And here in particular with the Salton Sea, we're looking at an astonishingly interesting plethora of opportunities in renewable energy. There would be potentially a lot of different things happening in a relatively small area. So there's going to be heightened sensitivity, heightened interest, heightened focus, and maybe that's the most important word, heightened focus that you need to be prepared for in working on that. Okay, next slide. So here comes the ad. Not only for ourselves, but any consultants that you're working on. You need, in going into these projects, to have a competent legal and other consultant team that not only individually knows their stuff, but can work well together as a team to make this work. The biggest problem that you have by not being well prepared and not taking on as much upfront of the environmental issues as that particular project deserves is the incredible loss of time and money from not having done it right. As is noted here in the slide, you know, a loss at a CEQA trial represents 2, sometimes 3 years of project on ice and an enormous outflow of cash. No matter how careful you try and be and how hard everyone works to keep the costs contained, a CEQA litigation is an enormous expense, frequently. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, I've seen them go into the millions. And if at the end you lose because you weren't well prepared, you didn't do your homework at the outset, not only have you lost the project time and the cash flow out the door and have to start over, a lot of times the law does provide that your opponent's attorney's fees are to be covered. And you could actually end up paying for their attorney's fees to create the hassles that you've just been through for the last 2 or 3 years. So pulling all that together, we have amazing opportunities here, and I feel that we're all right on the verge of finally a solution to the Salton Sea issue so that we can get it back, get it restored, create a real engine of opportunity here. But in doing that, we're going to have some of these interim challenges in getting these projects approved, and we would just simply encourage you to think very closely, very heavily about this planning process for the environmental approvals. It's going to take you some time. Thank you very much.
Before I introduce the third speaker, let me put the first 2 speakers on alert. They have no idea what my question is going to be, because it ends up, we'll see how much they can help navigate. Having the facts and having the information, and as Ernie just said, planning is great. Knowing what was the past, with master planning and so on, is great. That's the past, that's the tunnel, that's looking behind. And they did not hear this. We got to now make that tunnel longer, and we have to be more successful, and we have to, as I say, be the people who guarantee that destiny is that choice, not chance. So, to Brian, and you can look at them in the eye. I didn't tell you I was going to ask a question, did I? And well, yours is going to come after. And Ernie. Okay, Ernie, you have people in your law firm, and don't give the answer yet. I'm giving you time to think about it because I realize it might be a little curveball. In the firm, and you're on top of things like only in the news 2 days ago, they're talking about that it looks like wind credits will be continued and that solar might go away. What do you predict in terms of regulatory or laws or taxes or anything that we can help plan for the future, taking our crystal ball out, so then we know what to look for as we go down that road and make the tunnel longer? And Brian, you might be sorry you ever joined Chambers a couple of months ago. Your question, should you choose to answer, is obviously we know where we've come from with the master planning. What must be done, not by Chambers, not by anyone in the audience here, but collectively, if renewables are going to be successful for restoration of the Salton Sea. Because choice, not chance. I'm going to give myself a little pat on the back for picking up on something. I became friendly with Juan de Lara. And Juan, I noticed, knew a lot of people. And I wanted the destiny of what I saw when I left Brooklyn for a better place in California. That I wanted to be successful in doing something that was for me, not for my company or anything like that. And Juan and I became friends over the years. And then Juan said, you know, we need someone who's committed, which obviously I am, to the community, including all the local pubs. And I became active on the Salton Sea Action Committee, active on the IVDC, and he therefore took me out and gave me some good Mexican food, some great Mexican gas, and he worked on me for a couple of hours. He even had his wife there to make sure that I couldn't get up and leave, and said, we got to change a little bit the theme of the summit. The summit is great. I mean, I see how it's advanced over the years. For those who were in the last couple of years, they can see the change and the vibrancy and so on, and everyone working together. He said, we need someone in a mole in Imperial County. I said, I'm from Brooklyn. I can't be a mole. I'm a Jewish boy from Brooklyn. They'll never pass. But I actually was voted as Hispanic of the Year. Some was making a joke the other day, and I got something in the mail. Is to try to get Salton Sea on the agenda, because things that seemed impossible a couple of years ago, it's happening. And to the person who asked the question in the audience before about the federal government, the state, and so on, they're all doing wonderful things, but you can't count on them. It has to be the people who are the direct stakeholders that are doing that. So with that introduction, I want to know what you're going to suggest has to be done with master planning sort of work. And now I'm ready to introduce Robert Brock, commonly known as Bobby Brock, who's the president and CEO of the Imperial Valley Community Foundation. And one of the key things about Bobby is he's been a member of just about every organization you can name, from the Boy Scouts and so on, and active in the community. And thinking out of the box, Bobby is an example of taking the leadership of this foundation. And it's a foundation of private sector, a foundation that helps put together funding to accomplish some of these research programs we're talking about, because this is the place to have renewable research, things like George talked about just recently, and yesterday you heard about Oberon Fuels. This community wants it. So he's going to talk a little bit about the foundation and what many people might not be aware of. I'm not going to steal his thunder other than to say that he's also going to talk about how in a couple of months the momentum has come up and the dollars are flying in. From private sector and not by donations, like here's $100. By private sector who realizes it's in their best interest if renewables go and Salton Sea develops and we work with the tourist martinis as opposed to the tourist martinis and everything else, we all benefit. Bobby, and remember your questions.
Thank you and good morning. I thought my voice was going to sound more macho than that. It's a pleasure and an honor to share the panel with these other gentlemen to my left and again to be able to present to the summit. Again, my name is Bobby Brock and I'm with the Imperial Valley Community Foundation. When they asked me to come and talk here and then Bob asked for a short bio that he could read, they wanted a picture too, so I asked our marketing people if they would send me one that had better resolution than the one that was on our website. And so, Connor, if you want to hit the next slide. This is what they sent me. They said, is it, oh, I have to do it myself? They said, is it one of these? And they sent me the one that was on the front. And then they sent me this, and I was just kind of curious to see what I'd look like with a 6-foot mustache. I know, pretty damn good looking. And the tie is real, too. The mustache is not, and my lips aren't that gray. A little bit about the Community Foundation. We are a privately established nonprofit organization. It's a 501c3 public benefit charity. We're governed by a board of local directors, and these are folks from the community that are both involved in business and civic organizations, as well as also have a personal history in local philanthropy. There's a saying that says you're never an expert in your hometown. The same is true with I think, volunteer leadership. Is we have to go outside of our community to be recognized for the contributions outside of just a dollar. And there's a number of folks that are here today, like Greg Smith and Tom DeBose, who are both past chairman of the organization. Tim Kelly with IBEDC as our current chairman. And then also, we have Mike Kemp in the back, who is involved in this, and he's with the Imperial Irrigation District as a former vice chair. Sue Giller was on the board, previously, and then Connor Smith, of course, who's been the tech guru for the conferences with our office as well. But there's a lot of experience that comes through the leadership of the foundation, and it's not recycled. I know that in a small community, you do have overlap between boards, and our goal is to get those that are seasoned and have a real, vibrant and open eye to moving forward and being visionaries for the community. And I appreciate, again, the hand-in-hand work that we do, that Connor and I do it with our board and the rest of our volunteers and advisory committee members. The Community Foundation, as we're going to tie this back into renewable energy development and a Salton Sea restoration, that's a developing specialty for us. The primary goal of the Community Foundation is to build a portfolio of various charitable funds that are established by families and businesses in Imperial County or those that are investing in the community for the things that they care about most, whether it's a scholarship, a fund to benefit a local hospital or a museum, or some other community program. We try and be stewards of those dollars. And again, down the line, our goal is to have a significant permanent endowment here to benefit Imperial Valley. The fun part isn't always raising money, it's giving the money away. And we understand that too for families that they don't want the burden of having to establish their own private foundations. Same thing for local businesses. They can donate money. We're a central resource, one-stop shopping at its best to help design giving programs. And the board's responsibility is to honor the requests of those donors that didn't put restrictions, but put their goals, their charitable goals into those funds. So we try and help fulfill those promises and give back to the community over time. And that's the beautiful thing about endowments, is you end up, again, over time and pooling the resources, giving back more than you ever put into it. And we have donor stories where donors established funds 15, 20 years ago that have now doubled in their original gift size, as well as they've been able to give away that same amount of money. So that's kind of neat, and we're glad to be a part of that. Again, some of the distinct features of the Imperial Valley Community Foundation are that we don't we don't only manage funds, but we also work with community groups and partners that are looking to organize and become either fully incorporate or apply for their own tax exemption, or we, again, provide technical assistance to those that are looking to become stronger and more sustainable. We are broad and flexible in purpose. Community foundations probably have the most flexible and forgiving, to call it that. Maybe that was the wrong word. I'd have to ask the attorneys. I am not an attorney, by the way, and this tie is not a clip-on. But we are allowed some bit of leverage, again, where we work, almost call it like an umbrella organization, where we allow other, again, families, businesses, and organizations to borrow our tax exemption, our federal tax ID, with the caveat that our board approves all grants. And so we can allow folks to set up named funds for the things that they care about, and they can make recommendations as long as our board approves them. We're also a neutral convener in the sense that we work with folks from all sides of various issues. And we've been involved in talks of merging local healthcare facilities, as well as also some of the work we're doing now moving forward with new conservation funds. Working with environmental organizations like Sierra Club, with 8 Minute Energy and AES Solar, and so trying to get those folks together and then being in the middle of that. It's kind of exciting. It's not what I went to school for, but I do see it as being extremely meaningful moving forward and beneficial to the community. Again, we allow donors to be as involved as they want to be in a fund, whether they want to have advisors or family members participate, or else if a business says, I want to have employees, advise these funds, or just simply say, here's some guidelines, I'm going to walk away, you guys take care of it. And so long as we do that, we also recognize and preserve the name of those donors to help provide a history behind local giving programs, as well as also keep a track record, on things that are, usually left, unrecorded. Personalized giving, again, assisting folks in the things that they care about most. We're flexible that we can change over time and get things in writing, but we want to, again, preserve those gifts that are meaningful to people, because if there wasn't a reason to give it, they didn't feel compelled to, a lot of people wouldn't do that. Again, the permanent endowment piece. Our funds can be non-endowed or permanent endowment where the principal is permanently preserved and you just grant out of the interest and the earnings, or else we're able to develop hybrid funds, or else some that may include a sunset clause so they get spent down over a certain number of years. Designing those programs is one of the things that we do, and we're, I think, becoming a lot more engaged in these things as donors have an interest on the corporate side, either through secret requirements or else other mitigation, or else even on the voluntary, I guess, will of them. Perhaps it gets tied into project financing as well. Like IBEDC, and Tim has said it before, their goal is to improve the local economy. Hand in hand with them, we worked for several years since the Community Foundations revitalized itself in early 2007. But the Community Foundation is here to improve the local quality of life. And we do that through regional cooperation, through conversations with local organizations and stakeholders, as well as, again, putting our best foot forward and committing our time and staff to making a difference and keeping our promises. Again, these are just a list of the kind of funds. I won't run through them all. I think we've said that there are some that we've self-initiated. For example, the Imperial Valley Regional Disaster Fund that was set up to help with earthquake, and disaster recovery efforts following the earthquakes in 2010. That was the Easter earthquake and significant damage to Baja California and the neighboring regions, as well as in Imperial County. I think we probably had close to $100 million in damage, just as an idea. We didn't fund all of that, but we were able to help families get back in their homes and find a place to live, seniors and low-income displaced families, for about 9 months. And we just finished up some more disaster giving here in the last few months after some earthquakes and flooding during the summer. So there's that. We've also worked with other industries, namely the banking and financial institutions, where we've established a financial institutions fund that's made up of local deposit holding banks and credit unions in Imperial County. We've also gone to speak with the majors such as Chase and Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Union Bank, and others, and we're still having communications with them, but local institutions contributing to that include Rabobank, Community Valley Bank, First Imperial Credit Union, and Sun Community Federal Credit Union. And so with that, again, pooled resource and the opportunity for them to work together towards putting a larger pot of money towards the same community initiative or program that they would separately, again, it makes that much more of an impact. And we're a high impact organization. We want to see the best use of dollars. The opportunity to either leverage or else create matching opportunities is something else that we're very passionate about, as well as now, again, the opportunity, and I'm getting into it, about conservation and mitigation programs. This was something that was, I don't want to say new to us, because we have, again, the depth of our board brings expertise with it. And so I don't have to be an expert in everything because we have leadership that has that experience and does it for a living, and they're giving their time to us, as well as also our professional advisors network with the wealth planning community. But now, with the assistance of Chambers Group, with Tim Day and Bob Yellen and others, we're developing a niche in conservation, as well as the future of mitigation, banking and habitat protection, wetlands conservation, cultural and other biological resource preservation as well. So it's kind of exciting for us as we've worked with Pattern Energy, and we're just on the verge of signing some fund agreements. They did announce as part of their project financing $3 million to come through the Imperial Valley Community Foundation over about a 20-year period, for a few different community projects. One is a community endowment in the Ocotillo No Mirage area. Another is going to benefit local education, and then there's a general fund that we are working with as well. But the one that's most recent is the Burrowing Owl Stewardship and Education Fund. And this was established in the last few months, signed and capitalized by 8 Minute Energy and AES Solar. We just had a groundbreaking celebration at their Mount Signal Solar project here a couple of weeks ago. But this is something that was established, and we worked with the Sierra Club, and a few other conservation organizations and the developers to establish the guidelines and criteria for this fund. Again, the unique, I think, attribute about this fund is that it's setting a precedent for us to include, again, not just local expertise, but also participation from regional and national conservation organizations, as well as a voice from that local agriculture community, and our board, and then locals that do these things on an ongoing basis, that have an experience working with burrowing owl issues, and whether that's relocation programs, preservation, breeding. We're getting people together that normally don't talk, at least that we're aware of. And again, as that neutral convener is appropriate for us, and we're in a good position to do those things, not just with burrowing owls, but also with other issues. Again, whether it's Native American cultural preservation, efforts, or else other biological resources and species of concern or endangered species, wetlands mitigation. We're setting a good pace, and I know that as Bob mentioned, we have a few projects moving forward and several in the pipeline that will capitalize and realize before the end of this calendar year. We do hope to release a grant program, an opportunity by the end of 2013, so we can get some money out, let people see that, again, the way we measure the difference we make is through impact and reporting. And so, it's a learning process, and the curve isn't as steep as it was before, but there is still a bit of one, and it's exciting, and there will always be as we move forward, because a lot of what we do besides preaching sustainability is creating innovative philanthropic solutions. Again, just a few key points before I wrap it up, because I know we want to leave some time for questions. When I practiced this at home, it only took me 45 seconds. I don't know what happened. It's important, again, that we support economic development and growth in Imperial County and the neighboring regions, not just in our hometown, but also in Baja California, Riverside counties in San Diego and Yuma, Arizona, and through Las Vegas and Phoenix, that we do include others. Community foundations, there's probably about 600 or more throughout the United States. And one of the best things about them is that we're willing to share our experiences and information, templates, and so on, because there's other communities that may be looking to do something similar with their own flavor, but we all need help. And so I think as part of this is we are creating a cooperative cohort of folks that communicate on a regular basis, that do move the ball forward, and are willing to coexist. Again, that's bringing together project developers and those that would typically be opponents to the project. So education is a big part of what we do, and we try and do it on an ongoing basis and as quickly as possible. And so having opportunities through us and that we're able to create rather quickly, we kind of hope that we can help expedite projects moving forward, as well as also know what the barriers may be and the concerns of those, again, on either side of the ball. I think we've already burned through some of that stuff. We are looking at creating some mitigation banks. There are requirements to receive credits on those things as people try to offset impacts. So we are looking into doing some of those things on a permanent basis, as well as taking advantage of opportunities perhaps to work together with the Torres Martinez tribe on some of their wetlands efforts, and getting more involved and being a fly on the wall, and then getting more engaged with the Salton Sea Action Committee, and again, trying to find local resources because it is going to be a private-public partnership. Again, we're not publicly funded. We're able to make grants to the government, but all of our dollars so far have come from private donations, both from individuals and businesses. Outside of any mitigation or voluntary contributions, we do also seek the support of the local community. We know that there are enthusiasts out here, either on the development side or else on the conservation side, that want to support these types of activities, and we welcome those contributions. Again, the driver on this is regional cooperation, and we applaud Ivy EDC and everyone for being here, again, for helping to be a cheerleader for that and an ambassador for regional development. And again, we're glad to be a part of it, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bobby. Well, getting back to the main theme, development of the Salton Sea and its opportunities, looking out of the box, being innovative. The foundation has gotten money already from AES, Amen Energy. We can take the money to an agency like this for mitigation banking, habitat mitigation, requirements on the EIRs, so the money stays in the community to go back not only for tax base, but for helping the restoration of the sea and renewable energy. Now, real quick, Ernie, you're on.
I had a chance to think about your questions, Bob. I appreciate the couple of minutes to be able to think about them. Three things that come to me when you look at what's coming in the world of entitlements in the relatively near future. One, I think, particularly as it applies to what we're doing here today, is I think you're going to see more detailed standards for each type of renewable energy source. The expertise is growing on each of the different types, and that naturally is going to I think, turn itself into more specific standards on a going forward basis to try and make those projects as efficient and as well operated as possible. Second thing is I think there is going to become greater clarity and certain consolidation of jurisdiction and authority of agencies. I think you're going to see a narrowing of that. Right now, you can kind of, get a handful of BBs and throw them at the wall, and you could have, 8 or 10 different potential agencies, some of which we saw on the list I had up there. And I think with renewables, that's going to consolidate a lot in the next 5 years as we do more and more of them and we gain more expertise. Finally, there are considerable efforts underway right now to reform the California Environmental Quality Act. It was passed and enacted about 40 years ago and marked a significant change in how applications are processed, certainly in this state, and it's still viewed as that by about the other 49. People come to California and they just shake their heads. They can't believe sometimes how different the process is from other places they're involved in. But we've also gained a tremendous amount from it in being cautious and doing good types of developments and doing exactly the kind of things that you were talking about by addressing like the burrowing owl and other, addressing habitats and make it possible for all of this to coexist. It can be done, it's being done, and it's being done well. So I think you're going to see some efforts at reforming CEQA to make the process a little less cumbersome, to make it more effective while still being less cumbersome. But our sense right now is that any real reform in that is a long way off. I don't think you're going to see anything substantial for quite some time.
And I'm going to speak to Brian in a second, but if you have questions and thoughts, the obvious takeaway from that is the regs keep changing, the taxes keep changing. Again, the luck part of the equation is that we're fortunate to be in a region where the regulators and developers and consultants are willing to work together to get through the maze, and you got to keep on top of what's going on because it is a changing, moving target. Brian.
This will come on? Great. And just in case there's any questions out there, the original framework plan actually only included geothermal because actually solar energy and other forms of renewable energy weren't really, out in the on our radar screen. And ultimately, I think using this as a program that we can go back in and take a look, we really looked pretty closely at these 6 planning districts in relationship to the uses, and now it's going to be looking at how do we integrate, as I say, these opportunities in relationship to that. The key thing with this concept was that ultimately it would then feed into the general plan to make a processing easier. The other thing is that ultimately in the County of Imperial, you want to be looking at the geothermal and alternative energy element, which would feed into this. But I think finding those locations where they really can be innovative, like the project we saw earlier in the last panel, I think in relationship to using the playas, I think is a great example of trying to tie together. Then the gentleman from the involved with a lot of local citizens basically doing projects on their own, finding ways that they can ultimately be in essence, established in a program, a plan that the Salton Sea Authority and IID can hold up and say, this is our vision. We'll help you get money. First of all, that's one of the most important things from the federal government, from the state government, but also will then help you with the implementation process, which ultimately is going to take you through the process, which is most important, and possibly take away some of the litigation issues. So those were some of the things I would do.
Well, just sticking on that question a little bit, is there something, though, in the old plan, before it's modified, that can slow down the process, or is there something that has to be done to move forward the process quicker?
No, I don't think it's anything to slow down the process. Ultimately, it focused on geothermal as far as an energy element, and when we actually have a geothermal over area. It also focused on the stakeholders at the time, which really emphasized more development. The emphasis, by the way, of this plan was to create economic value in land. And that's really what the value of having a plan is as I said, we ultimately looked at 245,000 acres, looked at residential mixed-use development, how could we increase that value of land? And I think now if you add to that mix the alternative energy in relationship to local areas, and conservation, by the way, because conservation is a key part of this plan also, then I think you'd be more representative of where we are today.
Okay, and one last question I'm going to turn to the audience for Bobby. A yes or no? Can your foundation be used for funding, for grants, a mechanism for a research project, an R&D project, like George was talking about, or someone who else wants to do some kind of development related to algae or whatever?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
See him later. I want to give it, but yeah, that's important, and that was something, one of the reasons I wanted Bobby to be here. There is an innovative, making sure that we're going again, choice, not chance. And the key is seek out the elements that are located here to help you. Any quick question from anyone in the audience?
Question for Brian Mooney. Considering that a large part of the Salton Sea KGRA geothermal resource area is underneath the saline habitat, considering that a large portion of the Salton Sea geothermal resource is underneath the saline habitat ponds that were envisioned in the plan you showed and other ponds, how were you going to make geothermal access possible?
Well, let's start with the aspect that, there, it's on. That this plan hasn't really been revised since 2006. Ultimately, what you need to do is go back and take a look at, okay, are there new forms of economic development in the case of another type of energy? And then you ultimately have to balance it. Now, we also heard that some of that geothermal in relationship could potentially still be utilized in a couple of those programs, and also where they were going to do a well. So you need to look specifically at that area that we created the overlay, and we had an overlay of probably, I'll bet it was probably 4,000 acres at least for geothermal. And now if we want to add in a new use, we want to find ways that those two uses can be compatible and work together. That's the whole idea, because what we're seeing is this, again, 2013 is really, it's almost like 50 years later from the standpoint of the change in technology. But it also creates that great opportunity in relationship to innovation and alternatives. So I don't have a specific answer on how it would be done, but it could be done in relationship to looking at exactly what the new technology is going to give us and how we can integrate that with geothermal.
Time for one more question. Anyone? Going once? Going twice? Go to lunch.
Okay, let's have a round of applause for Bob and his panel. I think it was very informative. Let's wait a couple minutes for they're setting out the lunch right now, but that gives you an opportunity to use the restroom, to run over to the exhibit hall and get your passports filled out and take them over to the registration desk, and get ready for lunch. And then we'll be back about 10 minutes to 12 with our program. Thank you.